Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Margolick. I'm a captain type in the Marine Corps. I have the pleasure of being assigned to NavalX, where I am the director, or as I think of it most days, as the principal instigator of the Centers for Adaptive Warfighting. It's a project that is in part supported by NavalX, but is in most parts the work product of Marines and sailors and civilians from across the fleet, devoted to tools for culture change and helping us get better at getting better. One of these is design thinking, the focus of today. In a couple minutes here, I'm going to kick it over to Josh and to Rich. We're going to be our host for the day, and that'll be basically the last you hear from me. But a few things you should bear in mind as we get moving here. First off, we're going to be on a first name basis today. This is a search world more than an execute world. For those of you who are familiar with that way of thinking about things, complex problems require complex solutions, complex participation, and a lack of fear in contribution as we do it. Which is why we operate almost all the things we do on that basis, recognizing that you can bow and get on the mat and bow and get off the mat when it's time to take care of other work. I also want to emphasize we're thinking of this as a social media function. It's certainly public facing, open invitation to the public. That tells us a little bit about what tools we can use here, and also tells us a little bit about what kind of conversation we can have. So while it can be broad and far ranging, we have to stay away from FOUO, CUI, and any other information in that realm, and we just want to remind you that that's the case and emphasize that we'll be taking care to take care for the course of the rest of today. You'll notice that there are two functions that you have access to at the moment. One of them is the chat. Anything you post in there, we'll do our best to address, but you should all be able to talk to one another. And then on top of that, there's a Q&A function. Anything you post in there, we'll make sure you get an answer. And Josh and Rich will pose as many of them as we can to the speakers during the time that we have available. While we're on the subject of CAWcasts, let me highlight for you that next week, Major Lucas Burke is going to host an innovation conversation among representatives from all the major innovation and agility cells across the DoD and IC. If you happen to be at one of those and you'd like to give a 5 or 6 minute presentation on what it is you do and why it matters and when people should reach out to you, we'd love to host you. You can reach out to us as you can for any other issue related to the CAWcast at contact.thecaw, C-A-W, @gmail.com, or post something in the comments here and we'll make sure that somebody gets back to you. And with that, and no further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Josh Thomas and Rich Walsh, our esteemed leaders for the following conversation. Rich is now at OpNav and OSD. He's been an innovation and agile leader across the department for maybe more years than I have been in the department, and is one of the many people I look up to across the DoD and whom I call when I have a question about how to break something better. And Josh, of course, is our Marine representative for today. He's an infantry Marine turned logistician. He's now at MARSOC, and he's been one of the stalwart leaders of the Centers for Adaptive Warfighting since he found us a few months ago. I suspect we'll hear some of both of their stories. And with that, I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Josh and Rich. Glad to have you, everybody.
All right, so I'll kick it off. I've got a question for all of you. How many times in your organization have you ever heard this? Insist on doing everything through channels. Never permit shortcuts to be taken in order to expedite decisions. Or handle over precise wordings of communications, minutes, and resolutions. Or insist on perfect work in relatively unimportant products. Send back for refinishing, any of which have the least flaw. And finally, refer all matters to committee for further study and consideration. Attempt to make those committees as large as possible, never less than 5. I'm assuming that some of you may have heard some of these things in your organizations. So, where do these come from? Well, in fact, everything I just listed comes from a manual that was put out by the CIA in 1944 on how to sabotage, specifically Chapter 11, called the OSS Simple Sabotage Manual. So ask yourself, in our day-to-day lives, why are we doing this in our organizations? I'd also like to give you one quick kind of story. Many years ago, there was an effort called Illuminate that I was involved with. But a lot of people, except for you guys now, are about to find the backstory about how it got started, and it's relevant for our discussion going forward. We were asked, a small group of us, were asked to figure out a way to spread innovation and high velocity learning in the Navy stealthily. And we thought about all the traditional approaches, and one thing that came to mind was what's 180 out of phase for all these approaches? What is the exact opposite of what everyone would expect us to do? So what we did is we took that OSS Simple Sabotage Manual, and we took an old brief from an old fighter pilot named John Boyd and combined the two of them into a brief called Patterns in Bureaucracy. And then we leaked it all over the Navy. In one place, it got forwarded all the way up to, at that time, Vice Admiral Alcoin, who was in charge of the fleet in Japan. Read it, said, you know what, this is outstanding. Bring this team out here and have them train my fleet. Now, years later, that course has been taught to thousands and thousands of people. But it is an important lesson that a lot of times a traditional approach isn't necessarily going to work, and the best approach is usually 180 out of phase for what you might think needs to be taken. And with that, I'll pass off to Josh.
Well, thank you for that, Rich. Josh Thomas, and part with the Center for Adaptive Warfighting, been doing the design thinking, been doing a lot of the creating for the Warfighter Center Design Facilitator Guide, which, Rich, I don't know if you know, but I plagiarized a lot of your work into our workbook. It's been very helpful, and I appreciate it.
The greatest form of flattery, sir.
So been putting that together and facilitating, doing these design thinking courses, and just encouraging people to work better as teams and use some of these methods in other ways. I really got into this when I saw how people could collaborate in such an easy way with, you know, some yellow stickies and a marker, and come up with some really great ideas to almost anything. You can, to after action reports, or just putting a simple plan together to get everybody's input, because there's really no bad plan. You take everybody's plans together, you can come up with so much better. So before we move forward here, a couple things maybe I would throw out for people to keep in mind while they're listening to everybody today, if you could, is some questions to think about, you know, like how might you or how might we utilize the design thinking methods, you know, considering the situation we're all in remotely right now. And I'm sure you'll get some good ideas for that today. And another one, how might we inspire others to design thinking? I see there's a question up right now on how to inspire an organization to, you know, bring this into their organization. It's a very loaded question, or maybe you can help me out with that one, Rich.
Hold on. The one that's just asked in the Q&A?
Yes.
Yeah. So typing a response to it.
Okay.
What I say is, my quick tip is that if you're trying to defend, or not trying to defend, but if you're trying to make a case for design thinking or human-centered design in your organization, the biggest thing is, one, making sure that you've got metrics and making sure that whatever you're tracking is in alignment with the organizational goals, right? And when you roll out, if you're not tracking metrics, you don't know if you're actually improving, and you can't defend yourself. Second of all, if you're not in alignment, it's going to get cross-threaded. The other quick tip is, a lot of times we forget about the frozen middle, and we forget about the middle parts of management in the organization. We do that at our own peril. Those people play a critical role, and they must, kicking and screaming at times, be pulled into these efforts and encouraged, and their perspectives are incredibly valuable.
Good deal. Good deal. Appreciate that. So